I had never felt so much shame in my life as I did that day when my own son, in front of dozens of strangers on the beach, wished for my death out loud. My name is Michael White. I am 65 years old. Throughout my existence, I have walked the paths of patience, sacrifice, and generosity, but I never imagined that the twilight of my life would be shaken by a scene that, to this day, still echoes like an open wound. It all happened on the afternoon of July 15th, 2024, on the famous Miami beach. That morning, my wife Linda and I had breakfast at the Grand Beach Hotel, enjoying the aroma of fresh coffee and the breeze that signaled another family summer. Even Daniel, my 32-year-old son, had set aside his usual tense expression for a few minutes to joke with Sarah, his influencer wife, about the followers they would gain by sharing photos with the ocean in the background. Apparently, it was just an ordinary day, the kind you want to keep in your memory forever, although I had already been feeling the weight of small disagreements. The rhythm of our vacation, however, seemed synchronized until that fateful moment on the sand. As we walked along the shore after lunch, Daniel asked to speak with me alone. We moved a few meters away, just enough for Linda and Sarah to follow us with their eyes. His tone, like so many times before, was not a sincere plea, but a demand, a list of reasons that justified a new loan. "Dad, I need you to transfer me $50,000 today. It's to settle a debt and take advantage of an almost guaranteed investment." He looked at me with that mix of urgency and contempt that I had learned to identify in recent years, but something inside me could no longer respond in the same way. My heart was beating fast, not out of fear but out of exhaustion, out of that sadness that accumulates when you sense that love has been replaced by self-interest. I answered him with a calm I didn't even know I had. "Daniel, this time I'm not giving in. We've already talked about this. My answer is no." At that exact moment, his face transformed. His eyes met mine with rage and humiliation. He shouted without considering the scandal he would cause. "I hope you drown in the ocean, you pathetic old man." The silence that fell over the beach was as loud as his scream. The nearby beachgoers turned, first in surprise and then in second-hand embarrassment. Some looked on with pity, others with morbid curiosity. Linda was paralyzed, her lower lip trembling, and Sarah, trying to feign indifference, discreetly stepped away. My initial reaction was to freeze. The sun was still shining, but inside me, any possibility of a simple reconciliation had vanished into darkness. I felt the universe closing in on my identity as a father, as a dignified man, while the sound of the waves clashed with the humiliating murmur in my head. I took a deep breath. I clenched my fists and kept my gaze on Daniel, trying not to give in to tears or anger. The rest of the afternoon unfolded under that same blanket of discomfort. People whispered as we passed. Some children asked their parents why that man had yelled at his dad that way. Linda couldn't hide her shame, and I, although I appeared strong, felt how compassion and respect for the family were crumbling like rocks eroded by the sea. We headed back to the hotel in complete silence. Not a word was spoken between us during the ride. Sarah pulled out her phone to check her social media, as if reality could be hidden behind a screen. Daniel walked behind, with hesitant steps and a furrowed brow, still lost in his own emotional storm. When we got to the room, Linda tried to ask what had happened, but Daniel interrupted her by slamming the bathroom door shut. The sound of running water began to fill the air. I, with a mix of anger and curiosity, noticed the backpack he had left open on the bed. I was never one to invade my children's privacy, but something inside me, an instinct for protection and a sense of duty in the face of risk, pushed me to check its contents. Among messy t-shirts and a damp towel, I found a carefully hidden plastic package. The label was clear: 50 grams of marijuana. My heart pounded with the same vertigo as the argument on the beach. That wasn't just a sign of rebellion. It was an alarm that all boundaries had ceased to exist. I decided not to say anything at that moment. I remained silent, thinking about the stories from past years, the countless loans that were never repaid, the parties, the whims, and the justifications after every failure. I sat next to Linda, pretending the world was still in order, while, in reality, I was making the most important decision for my future and my dignity, to end the charade and reclaim the autonomy I had given up for too long. I could barely sleep that night. Linda asked in a low voice if everything would be okay. I answered evasively, hiding the pain and fear. Daniel came out of the bathroom late, avoided eye contact, and lay down on the bed, feigning exhaustion. Sarah remained absorbed in her phone, oblivious to the family shipwreck. At dawn, before Daniel got up, I booked our return tickets to Chicago. I informed him that the vacation was over, that we had to go back immediately, without offering any explanation. Linda looked at me, surprised. Daniel protested. But my decision was firm and irreversible. As we took the taxi to the airport, I felt my wife's questioning gaze and my son's growing anger. I, however, had silently begun to plan every step. The scream on the beach had been the spark, but the discovery in that backpack was the fire that consumed my last doubts. Everything that came next would be a direct response to the disrespect, manipulation, and betrayal. I was going to investigate, to protect my name, my history, and my assets. There was no turning back. This would be the beginning of the real turning point in my life. The flight back to Chicago was a suffocating experience. Daniel remained sunk in a hostile silence, with his headphones on and his gaze lost out the window. Sarah obsessively checked her phone, reviewing the metrics of her posts, as if the virtual world could erase the tension floating between us. Linda, for her part, tried to read a magazine, but her eyes constantly drifted towards me, searching for some sign to explain my sudden behavior. During those hours of flight, my mind didn't rest for a second. I went over every detail of what had happened in Miami. The contemptuous way Daniel had spoken those hurtful words, the shame reflected on Linda's face, and especially the image of that package of marijuana hidden among his belongings. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the perfectly legible label, 50 grams. It wasn't an amount for personal consumption. It was obvious my son was involved in something much more serious than I had ever imagined. Upon landing at O'Hare, we took a taxi to our home in the Gold Coast neighborhood. The journey passed in the same uncomfortable silence that had characterized the entire day. Daniel got out of the car without a word to us. He carried his luggage with rough movements and headed for the elevator. Sarah followed him, muttering something about an important meeting she had with a cosmetics brand. Once in our apartment, Linda finally couldn't hold back her concern any longer. She approached me as I left the suitcases in the entryway, and in a soft but firm voice, she asked, "Michael, what is really going on? You've been completely different since yesterday afternoon. You've never canceled a vacation like that." I looked into her eyes, those brown eyes that had been with me for so many years of marriage, and I felt a huge weight on my chest. I couldn't yet reveal to her what I had discovered in Daniel's suitcase. I needed time to process the information, to plan my next moves. I answered with a half-truth. "It's been a very difficult day, Linda. What happened on the beach affected me more than I expected. I need to think about a lot of things." She nodded, though I could tell my explanation didn't completely satisfy her. She knew her husband too well to settle for evasions. However, she respected my need for space and went to the kitchen to prepare some dinner. Daniel and Sarah had locked themselves in the guest room, where they usually stayed during their visits. I could hear raised voices, though I couldn't make out the exact words of their conversation. Occasionally, the tones became sharper, especially Sarah's, who seemed to be scolding her husband for something. I took advantage of that distraction to go to my office, a space that had always been my sanctuary during times of crisis. I sat down at the oak desk I had inherited from my father and turned on the table lamp. It was time to start understanding the true scale of the problem I had on my hands. I took out all the bank statements from the last 2 years from the main drawer, documents I had only skimmed in the past, but which now took on crucial importance. I began to trace a timeline of all the transfers I had made to Daniel. January of 2023, $15,000 for moving expenses. March of the same year, $20,000 to invest in an architecture project. July, another $10,000 for Sarah's medical emergencies. The list went on, page after page. Each justification had sounded reasonable at the time. Each plea had been accompanied by convincing explanations and promises of progress that never materialized. When I added up all the amounts, the result left me cold. Over the last 24 months, I had transferred my son the astronomical sum of $200,000. $200,000 that had vanished without a trace of any visible investments, improvements, or tangible achievements. Quite the opposite. Daniel was still unemployed. He lived in a rented apartment that I indirectly financed, and his lifestyle continued to be that of someone who had never worked a day in his life. As I reviewed the documents, my memory began to retrieve conversations I had dismissed as insignificant at the time. I remembered a phone call I had overheard by chance, where Daniel mentioned someone called the Chicagoan and talked about settling outstanding debts. A certain afternoon also came to mind, when I had come home to find my son extremely nervous, compulsively checking his cell phone and jumping every time it rang. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in a terrifying way. The constant requests for money, the erratic behavior, the increasingly elaborate excuses, and now, the physical confirmation that he was involved with illegal substances. Everything pointed to a reality I had refused to accept. My son had serious problems, very likely related to addictions or dangerous debts. Dinner passed in a tense and artificial atmosphere. Linda had made a Spanish omelet, one of my favorite dishes, in an attempt to normalize the situation. Daniel came down to the dining room with a grim expression, avoiding any eye contact with me. Sarah accompanied him, but her attention was divided between the food and the constant notifications on her phone. During the few minutes that dinner lasted, I discreetly tried to observe my son's behavior. His hands trembled slightly as he held his fork. He had dark circles under his eyes that I hadn't noticed during the vacation, and he moved with the restlessness of someone who is permanently on high alert. When my phone rang and I got up to answer it, I could see his eyes immediately dart towards the device, as if he feared the call had something to do with him. That night, after Daniel and Sarah had retired to their room, I stayed up very late. Linda had gone to bed early, exhausted by the emotional tension of the day. I remained in the living room, with the lights off, looking out the window at the illuminated streets of Chicago, and reflecting on the decisions I had to make. For the first time in many years, I was facing the real possibility that my fatherly love had been mistaken for weakness. For decades, I had believed that unconditionally supporting my son was the ultimate expression of my affection, but now I was beginning to understand that I might have been feeding the very behaviors that were causing him the most harm. The humiliation on the beach had been painful, but the discovery of the marijuana represented something much more serious. The confirmation that Daniel was willing to risk not only his own life, but also the reputation and safety of the entire family. I could not allow this situation to continue for another day. Before going to bed, I made a decision that would forever change the dynamic of our family relationship. The next day, I would begin an exhaustive investigation into my son's real activities. I needed to know the whole truth before taking any drastic measures. I would hire specialized professionals, review every available document, and if necessary, take the pertinent legal measures to protect the estate that had cost me so much effort to build. As I walked up the stairs to my bedroom, I felt for the first time in a long time that I was regaining control of my own life. The humiliation of the previous day had been the catalyst I needed to wake up from a prolonged dream of complacency and denial. It was time to act like the man I had been throughout my professional life, decisive, meticulous, and absolutely determined to protect what I valued most. The dawn of July 16th arrived with a mental clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I woke up before Linda, as was my custom, but this time with a completely defined purpose. While she slept peacefully beside me, I had already mentally mapped out every step I would take in the coming hours. I went silently to the kitchen, made a strong coffee, and settled back into my office. The golden morning light filtered through the curtains, illuminating the bank statements I had left, scattered on the desk the night before. Each document represented another piece of the puzzle I was determined to complete. I turned on my laptop and accessed the United Airlines website. For the next 15 minutes, with precise and determined movements, I changed our flight reservations. I canceled the return ticket scheduled for July 22nd and booked 4 seats on the first available flight to Chicago. The decision was made. We would return that very day, with no discussion or negotiation possible. While I was doing this, I heard noises from the upper floor of the hotel suite. Daniel and Sarah were already awake, probably getting ready for another day at the beach that would never happen. Their voices reached me muffled, but I could distinguish a certain irritation in my daughter-in-law's tone, as if she were scolding her husband for something. Linda appeared in the doorway of our suite's small living room, wearing her blue silk robe and her hair in a messy bun. Her eyes reflected the confusion of someone who has slept poorly due to accumulated worries. "Good morning, my love. Were you able to rest?" she asked, coming closer to place a kiss on my forehead. "I slept enough," I replied, closing the laptop lid. "Linda, I have to tell you something important. I've changed our flights. We're going back to Chicago this afternoon." Her expression immediately changed from morning tenderness to absolute bewilderment. She sat on the armchair across from me, crossing her legs and fixing her gaze on my eyes, with that intensity only a wife develops after decades of marriage. "Michael, please, explain to me what's really going on. This isn't normal for you. We've been planning this vacation for months, and suddenly you decide to end it after one day. Does it have to do with the argument yesterday between you and Daniel?" I nodded slowly, carefully choosing my words. I couldn't yet reveal the discovery of the illegal substance in our son's suitcase, but I couldn't continue to completely hide my motivations from her either. Daniel's attitude yesterday crossed every line of family respect. Not only did he humiliate me publicly, but he did it in such a contemptuous way that it made me reflect on many things I've been ignoring for too long. Linda nodded with understanding. She had also witnessed the degrading scene on the beach, and although she hadn't commented on it, I knew it had deeply affected her. I understand you're upset, but don't you think we should try talking to him? Maybe he's going through some problem we don't know about. That's precisely why we need to go back to Chicago. There are things I need to investigate, situations that require my immediate attention. This decision isn't impulsive, Linda. It's necessary. At that moment, we heard footsteps coming down the stairs that connected the 2 floors of our suite. Daniel appeared in the living room, wearing white linen shorts and a polo shirt I had given him the previous year. He looked like someone who had spent a restless night, with pronounced dark circles and disheveled hair. "Good morning," he muttered, heading straight for the small kitchen without making eye contact with either of us. "Daniel," I said in a firm but controlled voice, "I need to inform you that we've changed our plans. We're returning to Chicago this afternoon." He stopped dead in his tracks, his hand already reaching for the coffee maker. He slowly turned to look at me, and in his eyes I could perceive a mix of surprise, irritation, and something I could only describe as guilty relief. "What do you mean we're going back? We still have 6 days of vacation left. This is about yesterday, isn't it? Because if so, I think it's a completely disproportionate reaction." His tone was defensive, but it lacked the aggression he had shown on the beach. It was as if overnight he had processed the consequences of his behavior and was now trying to minimize the damage. "It's not a reaction, Daniel. It's a considered decision. I have urgent business to attend to in Chicago, and I believe this vacation has served its purpose." "What business?" "Your schedule was completely free until the end of July. I know because Mom told me when we organized this trip." Linda looked back and forth between us, like an unwilling spectator in a verbal duel whose rules she didn't fully understand. Sarah had appeared at the top of the stairs, dressed in a designer bikini and a silk cover-up, clearly ready for another photo shoot on the beach. "My business is private," I replied dryly. "The flight leaves at 6 p.m. I suggest you start packing your bags." Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but something in my expression must have told him that any argument would be useless. Throughout his life, he had learned to recognize when my patience had reached its absolute limit. "Fine," he finally muttered, "but I want you to know that I think this is unfair. One argument doesn't justify ruining the whole family's vacation." "One argument?" I repeated slowly, savoring each syllable. "Is that how you define the spectacle you put on yesterday? A simple argument?" The silence that followed was so thick it seemed to have physical weight. Sarah came down the rest of the stairs and approached her husband, placing a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of support that I found particularly irritating. "Well, if it's already decided, we'd better start packing," she said with a forced smile. "Besides, I have an advertising campaign coming up next week. Maybe it's better to be in Chicago to coordinate the details." Her intervention confirmed something I had suspected from the beginning. Sarah was as superficial as she appeared, incapable of understanding the seriousness of what was happening between us. For her, everything was reduced to minor inconveniences in her influencer's schedule. Over the next few hours, as each of us packed our belongings, I kept a discreet but constant watch on Daniel's activities. I watched him obsessively check his cell phone, how he stored certain items in specific compartments of his suitcase, and especially how he made sure to lock his carry-on bag. The journey to the airport was tense and silent. Our taxi drove through the sunny streets of Miami while I contemplated the coastal landscape that I might not visit again for a long time. Not because I couldn't afford it financially, but because this experience had irremediably stained my memories of this place. At the airport, while we waited in the departure lounge, Daniel tried to approach me several times. His attempts were hesitant, as if he were looking for the perfect moment to apologize or justify himself. However, I maintained a physical and emotional distance that discouraged any attempt at conversation. During the flight back, my mind was working at high speed. I had made the decision to drastically cut the vacation short, but that was just the first move in a much broader strategy that I would begin to implement as soon as we arrived in Chicago. As I gazed at the clouds from the airplane window, I mentally reviewed the list of professional contacts I would need to activate in the coming days. Lawyers specializing in family law, private investigators, forensic accountants, financial advisors. Each of them would play a crucial role in the asset protection process I was about to begin. I also reflected on the conversations I would need to have with Linda. She deserved to know the whole truth, but I had to carefully choose the time and manner to reveal my discoveries. Her motherly love could become an obstacle if I couldn't make her understand the gravity of the situation. Upon landing in Chicago, I felt that I was returning not just to my home, but to my territory of power. Here, I had all the resources, contacts, and tools necessary to face any challenge Daniel might pose. I was no longer the humiliated father on a foreign beach, but Michael White in his own element. That night, after Daniel and Sarah settled back into the guest room, I made a decision that would mark the point of no return in our family relationship. The next day, I would begin the most exhaustive investigation of my life, an inquiry that would reveal secrets that would forever change my perception of the son I thought I knew. The humiliation was over. The reconquest of my dignity was about to begin. Monday, July 20th, marked the beginning of the most meticulous phase of my life. During 40 years dedicated to the business world, I had learned that information is power, and that sound decisions can only be made when you have all the relevant data. Now, I would apply that same philosophy to unravel my son's true situation. Daniel had left early that morning, claiming he had a meeting with a potential client for an architectural project. Sarah accompanied him, mentioning something about a photo shoot in Lincoln Park. Their absence provided me with the privacy I needed to begin my investigation without arousing suspicion. My first move was to contact David Miller, a private investigator who had worked with me years ago on a case of industrial espionage at my company. David had an impeccable reputation in Chicago, as discreet as a shadow and as effective as a scalpel. His office was located in a discreet building on Michigan Avenue, perfectly integrated among law firms and financial consultancies. Mr. White, he greeted me with his characteristic restrained smile when he received me in his office. It's been a few years since our last collaboration. I hope everything is going well in your life. Actually, David, I need your services for an extremely delicate family matter. It's about my son, Daniel White. I need to know all the details about his activities, contacts, financial movements, and especially any information related to possible debts or irregular financial commitments. David took notes meticulously as I provided him with all of Daniel's personal data: social security number, current address, vehicle license plates, phone numbers, social media accounts, and any other information that could facilitate the investigation. Is there a specific period I should focus on? The investigator asked. The last 24 months, although if you find evidence of suspicious activities in earlier periods, I'm interested in that as well. And, David, this matter requires the utmost discretion. No information can be leaked to third parties. Of course, Mr. White, I perfectly understand the sensitivity of the case. What is your budget for this investigation? Money is not a limiting factor. I need complete and truthful results, regardless of the cost. We agreed that David would give me a preliminary report in a week and a complete file in 15 days. We also established a secure communication system. He would contact me only through a secondary cell phone that I bought specifically for this purpose. My next stop was the office of Michael Anderson, my trusted lawyer for over a decade. Michael had handled the incorporation of my companies, several commercial litigations, and was perfectly familiar with the structure of my family assets. His office occupied an entire floor in an elegant building on a street overlooking Lincoln Park. Michael, good to see you, he greeted me with a firm handshake. Although from your expression I suspect this is not a social visit. Indeed, Michael. I need to urgently review all documents related to my will, the corporate structure of my companies, and especially any legal mechanism that can protect my assets against possible future claims or manipulations. Michael raised his eyebrows, clearly intrigued by the nature of my request. In our years of professional relationship, I had never shown concern for these types of defensive protections. Have you received any specific threats? Is there a particular risk I should know about? Let's just say I've begun to reconsider certain aspects of my estate planning. I want to make sure my decisions are irreversible and that no one can question my mental capacity to make them. The words mental capacity echoed in the office like an alarm bell. Michael leaned forward, adopting that concentrated posture that characterized his moments of maximum professional attention. Michael, has anyone suggested that you might have capacity issues? Because if so, we need to take preventive measures immediately. No one has suggested anything yet, but I want to be prepared for any eventuality. I also need information on judicial guardianship proceedings. I want to know exactly what steps someone must follow to request another person's incapacitation. Michael took extensive notes as we discussed different scenarios and protection mechanisms. We agreed to schedule a preventive psychological evaluation with a recognized specialist, establish a witness protocol for any important decisions I would make in the future, and review the structure of my will to include specific clauses against possible challenges. In the following days, while I waited for the results of David's investigation, I decided to conduct my own preliminary inquiry. I began by meticulously reviewing all the bank movements of the accounts from which I had transferred money to Daniel over the past few years. The pattern that emerged from this analysis was both revealing and disturbing. My son's requests for money followed a predictable cycle, periods of relative calm followed by urgent requests for increasingly larger amounts. January 2023, $15,000. March, $20,000. July, $10,000. October, $25,000, and so on, with a progressive escalation culminating in the $50,000 he had requested in Miami. But the most disturbing thing was not the total amount transferred, but the nature of the justifications. Each request came with a perfectly constructed story: real estate investments that never materialized, professional projects that never started, medical emergencies that left no trace in hospital records. My son had become an expert storyteller of financial fictions. On Thursday, July 24th, David contacted me on the secure phone. His voice sounded tense, as if he had discovered information he would rather not have to communicate. "Mr. White, we need to meet urgently. I've found information that requires your immediate attention." We met that same afternoon at a discreet cafe in a quiet neighborhood, far from my family's usual routes. David arrived punctually, carrying a manila folder that he kept closed on the table until we were completely alone. "What I'm about to tell you is not easy to hear," he began, opening the folder and taking out several photographs. "Your son, Daniel, is in regular contact with individuals linked to the world of illegal betting and loan sharking." The photographs showed Daniel in different locations in Chicago, entering a gaming den downtown, talking with intimidating-looking men in a shopping center parking lot, receiving packages and encounters that were clearly not social. "How much does he owe?" I asked, although a part of me already feared the answer. According to my sources, the debt amounts to $180,000. Most of it corresponds to losses in online gaming and sports betting, but there's also a significant amount related to emergency loans at usurious interest rates, $180,000, a figure that surpassed even my worst estimates. All the money I had transferred to him over the past years had gone directly to feeding a destructive addiction that he had hidden with diabolical skill. "There's more," David continued, taking out other documents. "We have documented at least 5 meetings in the last month with an individual known as the Chicagoan, who handles aggressive collection operations for several groups of lenders. Your son is under extreme pressure to settle his debts. And the substance I found in his luggage? That's another source of income. He sells small amounts of marijuana in high-class social circles. He's not a major dealer, but he uses those profits to keep the most immediate threats at bay." The puzzle was finally complete. My son was not simply an irresponsible young man with money problems. He was a desperate gambling addict, involved in illegal activities, pursued by violent collectors, and willing to lie, manipulate, and humiliate his own family to obtain the resources he needed to survive another day. As I returned home that afternoon, with David's file tucked away in my briefcase, I felt a mixture of emotional devastation and strategic clarity. The investigation had confirmed my worst fears, but it had also provided me with the necessary tools to make definitive decisions. It was no longer about helping a son with temporary difficulties. It was about protecting my family and my assets from an individual who had proven capable of anything to satisfy his addictions. That night, after a silent dinner with Linda, I locked myself in my office and began to plan the next phase of my strategy. The investigation period was over. It was time to take action. Friday, August 2nd, dawned with a clarity that seemed to reflect the determination that had crystallized within me during the night. After thoroughly reviewing David Miller's report, it was time to translate all that devastating information into concrete, decisive actions. My first appointment of the day was with Michael Anderson at 9 a.m. I arrived at his office carrying a complete copy of the file David had prepared, along with all the bank statements and financial documents I had compiled during my own investigation. "Michael," I began without preamble as I took a seat across from his desk, "the situation is much more serious than I initially imagined. My son is involved in activities that could seriously compromise the safety of the entire family. I handed him a copy of the report and watched as his expression progressively darkened as he read each page. The photographs of Daniel with loan sharks, the records of his gambling debts, and especially the documentation of his minor drug trafficking activities caused in Michael the same shock I had experienced the day before. This is extremely serious, Michael, not just from a family perspective, but also a legal one. If the authorities discover these activities, they could try to link your assets to money from illicit sources. That's precisely why I need to act quickly and decisively. I want to completely cut off any financial connection between Daniel and my estate. Furthermore, I need to protect myself against possible future attempts at manipulation or blackmail. Michael leaned back in his chair, adopting that reflective posture that preceded his most complex analyses. For the next 30 minutes, we discussed different legal strategies, weighing the advantages and risks of each. The first thing we need to do, he finally determined, is to immediately revoke all powers of attorney and authorizations that Daniel may have over your bank accounts, properties, or companies. Second, modify your will to include specific clauses that exclude him from any inheritance. Third, establish a trust to protect your main assets. How long will these procedures take? If we act urgently, we can complete most of the paperwork within a week. However, there's something else we need to consider. Based on the information you've provided, Daniel might attempt some form of legal retaliation when he discovers these measures. Michael was right. A desperate gambling addict, cornered by massive debts and suddenly deprived of his source of funding, could try any legal maneuver to regain access to my estate. What kind of retaliation could he attempt? The most likely would be to file for your legal incapacitation, claiming senile dementia or cognitive decline. It's a relatively common strategy in inheritance disputes. If he could convince a judge that you lack the capacity to manage your own affairs, he could assume legal control of your assets. The irony of the situation did not go unnoticed. I had anticipated precisely this possibility during our previous conversation, and now it was revealed as a real and immediate risk. How can I protect myself against that scenario? We need to exhaustively document your full mental capacity through psychological and neurological evaluations with recognized specialists. We should also videotape a detailed statement where you explain the reasons for your decisions, so there is clear proof of your lucidity and determination. We agreed to begin immediately with all these procedures. Michael would contact the medical specialists, initiate the will modification process, and prepare the necessary documentation to revoke any prior authorizations granted to Daniel. My next stop was my primary bank, where I kept my main accounts. The branch manager, Linda Johnson, received me in her private office with the deference that had characterized our business relationship for over 20 years. Mr. White, how can I assist you today? Linda, I need to make some urgent changes to my accounts. I want to immediately withdraw all authorizations and additional cards that may be in the name of my son, Daniel White. Linda consulted her computer, typing quickly to access my account information. I see that he indeed has 3 business credit cards issued in his name, with limits of $20,000 each. He is also listed as an authorized user for transfers from your main account up to a maximum of $50,000 per month. I want to cancel all those authorizations immediately. Additionally, I need to set up automatic alerts for any attempt to access my accounts from unauthorized devices or locations. Of course, is there any specific reason for these additional security measures? Asset protection reasons, I replied without going into detail. I also want to change the access codes to my online banking and establish a telephone verification protocol for any transaction over $5,000. Linda processed all my requests professionally, though I could sense her curiosity about the reasons behind such drastic measures. In less than an hour, I had managed to completely shield my financial resources from any unauthorized access. My third task of the day was to contact the insurance company that handled the policies for Daniel's vehicle and his membership at the Oak Brook Country Club. Both services were financed directly from my corporate accounts, as part of the financial support I had provided to my son for years. The insurance representative, after verifying my identity, confirmed that I could immediately cancel the policy for the BMW 3 Series that Daniel drove. Without insurance coverage, the vehicle could not be legally driven, which would add additional pressure to his already complicated financial situation. Canceling the country club membership required an additional call to the general manager, who expressed surprise at my decision to withdraw a family member who had actively participated in the club's activities for several years. Mr. White, are you sure about this decision? Your son participated in the annual tournament last month and seemed very integrated into our social activities. Completely sure. As of today, Daniel White has no connection with me in terms of financial responsibilities. When I returned home that afternoon, Linda was waiting for me in the main living room, with an expression that mixed concern and determination. She had been watching my movements all week, and had clearly concluded that something extraordinary was happening. Michael, I can't keep pretending I don't notice what's going on. You've been leaving early, coming back late, receiving mysterious calls, and behaving as if you were managing a corporate crisis. I need you to explain what is happening with our family. I sat next to her on the leather sofa where we had shared so many important conversations throughout our marriage. It was time to reveal the whole truth, however painful it might be. Linda, what I'm about to tell you will be very difficult to accept, but you need to know the full reality about Daniel. Over the next hour, I showed her David Miller's report, the bank statements documenting the massive transfers, and the photographs that evidenced our son's illegal activities. I watched her face transition from disbelief to devastation, and finally, to a quiet resolve that I recognized as the moment a mother accepts she must protect her family, even from her own son. "How long have you suspected all this?" she finally asked in a broken voice. The signs had been accumulating for months, but the confirmation came with the incident in Miami and the discovery of the marijuana in his luggage. Linda nodded slowly, processing all the information. During our years of marriage, she had learned to trust my judgment on important decisions, and although this situation challenged all her maternal instincts, she understood the necessity of the measures I had begun to implement. "What's next?" she asked. "Tomorrow, we will complete all the legal procedures. Michael will have the will modification documents ready, and we will have established a complete shield for our assets. After that, it will be time to confront Daniel directly with all this information." That night, after Daniel and Sarah returned from another of their late-night outings, Linda and I stayed up very late, discussing the details of the strategy we would implement in the coming days. For the first time in weeks, I felt I was not facing this crisis alone. Linda, after the initial shock, had shown the same strength that had characterized her through all the difficulties we had overcome together over the years. The following Monday would be the day of the final confrontation. All preparations would be complete, all protections implemented, and all documents signed. Daniel would discover that the father he had publicly humiliated and financially abused for years had finally decided to protect his dignity and his estate with the same determination that had characterized his entire professional life. The reconquest of my family authority was about to reach its climax. Monday dawned grim, setting a mood of unease in the home. The anguish had given way to methodical calculation, to the cautious deployment of all my experience as a businessman and head of the family. The legal strategy, carefully crafted in the preceding days, was ready to be executed. Everything depended on each move being made at the right time and in the right way. Michael Anderson arrived at the house at 10 a.m., carrying a black leather folder containing the documents prepared to shield my assets. His expertise was as reassuring as it was implacable. There was no room for error or concessions. After the formal greetings, we settled in my office and began the detailed review. "Michael, here you have the formal modification of your will, with the express exclusion of Daniel as a direct beneficiary of the inheritance. I have also prepared the notarized revocations of all powers of attorney that could give him access to your assets, and the establishment of an irrevocable trust over your primary residence, investment accounts, and the family company," Michael explained, laying out the documents before me. I signed each page with the firmness of someone who knows they are safeguarding the result of a lifetime of sacrifices. Simultaneously, a video recording was made. Sitting in front of the notary's camera, I explained the reasons for these decisions in a clear and concise speech, demonstrating full capacity of judgment and will. Michael took care of delivering copies of everything to the various public registries and banks involved. 2 hours later, the new asset structure was already a legal wall against any attempt at manipulation or judicial assault. At noon, I received a call from David Miller. The private investigator had concluded his collection of evidence regarding the forgery of signatures on bank documents, as well as other irregularities committed by Daniel. The methods were conclusive. Fingerprints, access records, recordings in offices, and security cameras showed how my son had used old powers of attorney to withdraw significant sums without direct authorization. One of the documents presented by David was particularly serious. A loan contract issued in Daniel's name but signed with my forged signature. The document had been used to obtain a $20,000 advance from a financial institution, which, in the event of non-payment, threatened to seize a vehicle in my name. David provided me with the complete file, along with a recommendation to take these elements directly to the Chicago Police Department. This would ensure a criminal case for document forgery and misappropriation of funds. I consulted Michael again. Should I proceed legally, or is it better to seek a direct family confrontation first? I asked, aware that the legal consequences would be very severe. My advice is to confront him personally first. Give him the opportunity to be held accountable and avoid further complications. If he tries to manipulate or deny the facts, he will know that criminal charges are ready to be filed. Thus, the decision will be entirely his, the lawyer replied, with that professional equanimity that only experts in family crises show. We called a meeting at home for that same afternoon, also inviting Linda and Sarah. The atmosphere beforehand was tense. Linda remained serious and reserved, while Sarah insistently asked about the reason for the meeting. Daniel arrived somewhat nervous, his gaze fixed on the floor, anticipating that something unusual was about to happen. We settled in the main living room. On the table, I arranged the bank files, the investigator's dossier, and the notarial documents I had just signed. I asked everyone to sit down and be silent. That moment required total seriousness. Daniel, I began, over the past 2 years you have received transfers of over $200,000 under various pretexts. I now have proof that you lied about the destination of those funds, using them for illegal betting and illicit activities. Here is photographic evidence, bank records, and forged contracts that prove it. My son swallowed hard, a drop of sweat trickling down his forehead. Linda covered her mouth with her hand, barely holding back tears. Sarah tensed her jaw, clearly surprised by the unexpected turn of events. Furthermore, here is the proof that you forged my signature to apply for loans. All of these acts constitute serious criminal offenses. The police will be informed if you do not cooperate immediately in returning the funds and completely renouncing any claim on my estate. Daniel tried to mumble an excuse, but Michael interrupted him without raising his voice. You have the opportunity to avoid harsher legal consequences. Everything will depend on your decision here and now. Silence filled the room. Sarah physically moved away from Daniel, while Linda sobbed discreetly. I remained firm, determined not to let guilt or pity weaken my position. The conditions are simple, I continued. Hand over all documents, assets, and profits obtained illegally. Sign a notarized renunciation of any claim on my inheritance, and begin a formal process to treat your addiction. Any attempt to deny the facts or seek retaliation will be met with immediate legal action. Daniel remained silent for what seemed like an eternity, his face a mixture of anger, shame, and fear. He knew he had never faced a barrier of this nature in his life, and that this time he was completely cornered. Michael handed him the papers. The decision is yours, and time is limited, he murmured. An emotional storm swept through the room. Linda finally lifted her head and murmured, Michael, as difficult as it is, we should have reached this point a long time ago. There was no turning back. The legal counterattack was underway, and in the battle for my dignity, every piece on the board had been placed without error or hesitation. My son's future, and that of my family, depended on what happened in the next few minutes. The minutes following my ultimatum passed in a silence that seemed to thicken the air in the living room. Daniel remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the documents scattered on the table, as if he could find some miraculous escape from the situation he himself had created. His hands trembled slightly, and I could see his breathing had become irregular. Finally, he lifted his head and looked me directly in the eye for the first time in the entire meeting. In his expression, I recognized something I hadn't seen since his childhood, genuine vulnerability stripped of the arrogance and contempt that had characterized our recent interactions. Dad, he muttered in a hoarse voice, I know I've made serious mistakes, but things aren't exactly as you present them. The debts are real, but there are circumstances you don't understand. Michael intervened before I could respond. Daniel, this is not the time for justifications. The documents are clear, the evidence irrefutable. Your father is offering you a chance to resolve this without criminal consequences. I suggest you consider it seriously. Sarah, who until that moment had remained in silent shock, suddenly exploded. $180,000 in gambling debts? Selling drugs? What kind of nightmare have you dragged me into, Daniel? She stood up abruptly from the sofa, walking towards the window as she put her hands to her head. Her reaction confirmed something I had suspected. She was completely unaware of the true extent of her husband's problems. Sarah, Daniel began, but she cut him off with a dismissive gesture. No, don't say another word. For months I've been wondering why we were living so well without you actually working. I thought your parents were generously supporting you, but this is criminal. Linda, who had been crying silently, finally found her voice. Daniel, my son, how did you get to this point? When did all this start? My son turned to his mother, and for a moment I thought I saw a glimmer of the boy he once was. But when he began to speak, it was clear that even at this critical moment, he was still trying to manipulate the situation. Mom, it all started 3 years ago when I lost my job at the architecture firm. I felt desperate, useless. I started betting small amounts, just to feel some excitement. At first, I was winning, and thought it could be a temporary way to generate income while I found another job. But you never looked for another job, I reminded him harshly. I checked your tax returns. You haven't had any declared work income in over 4 years. Daniel lowered his head, trapped in his own lie. The betting became more frequent. When I lost, I bet more to win it back. It's a vicious cycle, Dad. A sickness. A sickness that I financed with my money for 2 years without knowing it. I responded without compassion. A sickness that led you to forge my signature and sell drugs. The loan sharks threatened me. I had no other choice. Michael leaned forward. Daniel, we understand you may be under pressure, but that doesn't justify criminal activities. Your father could have reported you directly to the police. The fact that we are here talking shows that there is still a will to resolve this as a family. For the next 30 minutes, Daniel alternated between attempts at justification, emotional pleas directed especially at Linda, and moments of silence where he seemed to be calculating his options. It was clear he was struggling internally between accepting the consequences of his actions or finding some way to maintain access to the family's resources. The pressure from the loan sharks was real. That became clear when his cell phone rang 3 times during our conversation. Each time he looked at the screen, his face grew darker. On the 3rd occasion, he decided to answer, I can't talk right now. Yes, I know. I need more time. A week, please. He hung up with trembling hands and looked at us with a desperate expression. I have until Friday to deliver $50,000, or they're going to take more drastic measures. What kind of measures? Linda asked, alarmed. They threatened to come here, to this house. They said if they can't collect from me, they'll find a way to collect from the family. A chill ran down my spine. Not only had my son compromised his own safety, but he had put the physical integrity of the entire family at risk. This revelation transformed my anger into something much more dangerous. Absolute determination. Daniel, I said in a sharp voice, you have just confirmed why these measures are not only necessary but urgent. I will not allow your decisions to endanger your mother. Michael took notes quickly. This constitutes a criminal threat. We can request police protection and expedite all legal proceedings. Sarah, who had been listening from the window, turned to us with an expression of total disbelief. Loan sharks threatening the family? Drugs? Forgery of documents? I can't be a part of this anymore. She walked towards Daniel with determined steps. I'm going to get my things. When I leave this house, I don't ever want to see you again. Sarah, please. We can work this out, Daniel pleaded, but she had already left the living room. The sound of her footsteps going up the stairs to the guest room echoed like a sentence. In less than 20 minutes, he had lost his wife, and from the look on his face, he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of the consequences that were coming. Dad, he murmured, adopting a tone he hadn't used with me in years. I know I've destroyed everything, but if you help me this one last time, I promise I'll change. I'll seek professional help. I'll stay away from betting. I'll do whatever it takes. It's no longer about promises, Daniel. It's about facts, and the facts show that for 2 years you have lied, stolen, and manipulated. No promise can erase that reality. Michael checked his watch. Daniel, the offer is still on the table, but time is running out. Your father needs a definitive answer. Linda approached her son and took his hands in hers. Son, accept the conditions. It's the only way you can start to rebuild your life, and the only way we can help you without destroying ourselves in the process. Daniel looked at his mother, then at me, then at Michael, and finally at the documents on the table. The weight of reality finally seemed to be sinking into his consciousness. There were no more escape maneuvers, no credible justifications, no alternative sources of funding. If I accept, he asked in a barely audible voice, what guarantee do I have that you won't report me afterwards? You have my word, I replied, but only if you fully comply with all the terms of the agreement. Any violation, no matter how small, will immediately trigger criminal proceedings. Daniel closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and when he opened them, I could see that something fundamental had changed within him. The mask of arrogance had completely disappeared, finally revealing the desperate man who had always been hidden underneath. I need time to process this," he murmured. Give me until tomorrow to decide." "You have until 10 in the morning," I replied without hesitation. Not a minute more. That night, after Daniel locked himself in his room, and Sarah left with her suitcases without saying goodbye, Linda and I stayed up very late, aware that we had reached the point of no return in our family's history. The battle for my dignity and the survival of our estate was just hours away from its final resolution. The morning of Tuesday, August 6th, began with a palpable tension that flooded the house. Daniel's silence, secluded in the room he once shared with Sarah, was only occasionally broken by the sound of text messages on his phone. Linda made coffee and toast, trying to simulate an impossible normality after the storm of the previous night, and I, immersed in my own whirlwind of emotions, compulsively reviewed the folder with the legal and bank documents, mentally rehearsing every word I would say in the coming hours. It was impossible not to feel the weight on my chest. The line between being a father and the protector of the family legacy, between affection and the demand for justice, had never been so blurred. The decision to move forward had already been made. What remained was the final act, the execution of everything Michael Anderson had advised, and what, with pain, Linda had finally come to accept. Around 9:30, as I was about to enter my office to check that everything was in order, I heard light footsteps approaching. Daniel, his face marked by deep dark circles and a neglected beard, appeared in the doorway. He didn't have the arrogant attitude of the previous day. His expression was that of someone who has spent the night debating between desperation and fear of the abyss. "Dad, I want to talk," he murmured in a neutral tone, almost devoid of emotion. I nodded and invited him to sit. Linda remained in the kitchen, not intervening, although she knew in advance what was going to be discussed. The conversation began with long pauses. Daniel tried, at first, to clarify some points, justifying his actions with the usual rhetoric of a victim of circumstances. He spoke of the pressure from the loan sharks, the feeling of professional failure, the toxic idea that paternal help was a right rather than a grace. I didn't interrupt. I let his words flow until they spilled into the unassailable reality of the facts. Finally, when his arguments were diluted by helplessness, I took out the folder and opened it meticulously in front of him. Step by step, I explained each document. The bank records, the unjustified money transfers, the proof of the forgery of my signature, the private investigator's reports, and the waiver agreements signed with Michael. "This is your last chance to act with dignity," I pointed out in a grave voice. "Here you have the voluntary waiver of all future claims on my estate. You will sign this document before a notary. In return, Michael will ensure that no criminal charges are filed, provided that you return the possible assets and commit to a professional rehabilitation process, which will be monitored clinically and legally for at least 18 months. There is no room for negotiation. If you reject this option, the charges will proceed, and my lawyer will file the corresponding complaint today." Daniel received the information like someone who understands that the foundations on which he has built his life have irremediably cracked. Today, for the first time, he recognized that there was no escape or stratagem that could save him, no emotional blackmail that could change the unchangeable. He was silent for a long time. Linda joined us in the office, gently placing her hand on mine. "Daniel, this decision does not exclude your right to life, but it does take away the privilege of letting your destruction drag the whole family down," she said with a firm and emotional voice. Her tears fell softly, but her posture was resolute. The mother, always indulgent, was now aligned with my determination. Finally, Daniel took the pen and signed the document, tearing up the agreement that removed him as heir to all patrimonial and business assets. The waiver was absolute and without possible legal recourse, protected by multiple clauses and witnesses present. Michael corroborated the signatures, recording them on video and paper. As of today, Michael and Linda are completely protected from any future claims on your part. Furthermore, we will begin the process for your addictions to be treated in a specialized clinic. It is the last way out you have before you fall into the void." Daniel remained silent. He asked to be left alone for a few hours, and with his dignity battered but the process completed, he left the office with slow steps. Linda and I, remaining in the room, didn't exchange words for a few minutes. The pain was real and the relief tangible. Finally, the security and peace of the family had been protected by the law, and the firm decision not to let the past dictate our existence any longer. That day, Sarah sent a brief message, confirming that she had left the apartment and cut off all relations with Daniel. The last privileges of our old family life were extinguished in silence, sealing the day as a final point and a new beginning, fraught with uncertainty, but also with hope. In the twilight of that afternoon, I reviewed once more the signed documentation and the modified will, aware that nothing would ever be the same again. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt that the future was back in the hands of those who truly valued and defended it. The days immediately following the signing of the waiver were characterized by a feverish activity aimed at consolidating all the protective measures we had designed. Michael Anderson worked with the precision of a surgeon, closing every possible legal loophole that could be exploited in the future. Experience had taught me that in the most delicate family matters, it is not enough to win a battle. You have to ensure that the war is definitively over. On Wednesday morning, Michael summoned me to his office to finalize the details of the asset shielding. He had prepared a complete file that included not only the documentation of Daniel's waiver, but also a series of additional safeguards that would protect my assets against any future attempt at reversal or challenge. Michael, he explained, as we reviewed each document, we have established an irrevocable trust that includes your primary residence, investment accounts, and all company shares. Daniel has not only waived his inheritance rights, but legally he cannot claim any type of compensation or alimony, given that he is a capable adult who has acted dishonestly. The meticulousness of the legal work was impressive. Michael had even anticipated remote scenarios, possible allegations of coercion, attempts to challenge on grounds of mental incapacity, claims from third parties who might act on Daniel's behalf, and even the possibility that my son might try to declare bankruptcy to transfer his debts to the family. What happens if the loan sharks insist on involving the family to collect Daniel's debts? I asked, remembering the threats we had heard during the confrontation. I have coordinated with the Chicago Police Department to establish a preventive protection protocol. Any attempt at intimidation or coercion will be treated as a serious crime. Furthermore, we have officially documented that Daniel has no legal access to any family assets, which makes any pressure exerted on you useless. Michael also gave me a copy of the psychological report he had commissioned to prove my full mental capacity. The document, prepared by the prestigious neuropsychologist Dr. Fernando Aguirre Montes, categorically confirmed that I possessed all my cognitive faculties intact, and that I had made all decisions with full knowledge and will. This report is especially important, Michael pointed out, because it preemptively deactivates any future attempt to question your decision-making capacity. If someone were to try to allege that you acted under coercion or mental deterioration, we would have irrefutable scientific evidence to the contrary. During that same week, we also implemented a series of physical security measures. I hired the services of a company specializing in home protection, which installed a system of surveillance cameras around the property and established a 24-hour monitoring protocol. It was not about paranoia, but elementary prudence in the face of the explicit threats we had received. David Miller, the private investigator, continued his discreet monitoring of Daniel's activities. His daily reports revealed a worrying pattern. My son was constantly moving around the city, holding furtive meetings with intimidating-looking individuals, and showing clear signs of physical and emotional deterioration. Mr. White, David informed me during one of our phone conversations, your son is under extreme pressure. The loan sharks have increased the frequency of their contacts, and I have documented at least 3 encounters where the discussions became clearly aggressive. I think it's a matter of days before the situation explodes. That prediction materialized on Friday afternoon. Linda and I were having a quiet dinner when the doorbell rang insistently and for a long time. Through the intercom system, I could see 3 menacing-looking men standing in front of the main door. One of them, whom we would later identify as the Chicagoan, spoke directly into the camera. Mr. White, we need to talk to you about your son's debt. We know you're in there. I immediately activated the security protocol we had established. First, I called the surveillance company, which dispatched a private security patrol. Second, I contacted the Chicago Police Department, reporting the previous threats and the presence of suspicious individuals. Third, I recorded the entire interaction through the video surveillance system. The men remained in front of the door for about 15 minutes, alternating between veiled threats and attempts at persuasion. Your son owes us money, and we know you have enough resources to resolve this. We don't want trouble, but we're not leaving empty-handed either." The arrival of the police patrol immediately dispersed the unwanted visitors, but the message had been clear. The consequences of Daniel's actions were coming directly to our home. That same night, Daniel appeared at the house visibly upset. His appearance was deplorable. Wrinkled clothes, unkempt beard, deep dark circles, and a nervous tremor he couldn't control. He came straight to me with a desperation I had never seen in him. "Dad, the loan sharks were here, weren't they? I'm so sorry, I didn't mean for you to get involved, but I need your help one last time. If I don't pay them tomorrow, they're going to do something terrible." His plea completely lacked the arrogance he had shown in the past. It was genuinely the cry for help of someone who had hit rock bottom and had no other options. "Daniel," I replied firmly, "you signed a waiver document. There is no more financial help possible. Besides, allowing you to continue with this self-destructive pattern would be doing you greater harm. But they're going to hurt me, or worse, they're going to come for you." Michael, who had arrived at the house to supervise the implementation of the new security measures, intervened in the conversation. "Daniel, your parents' protection is already legally guaranteed. The police have a complete file on the threats, and any act of intimidation will be prosecuted with the full force of the law. Your personal situation is a problem you must solve without involving the family." Linda, who had heard the entire conversation from the living room, approached her son with a pained but determined expression. "Son, I love you, but we can't continue to be accomplices in your self-destruction. The help you need is not money, but professional treatment for your addiction." Daniel looked at us alternately, searching for some crack of weakness he could exploit. When he found none, he left the house, slamming the door and shouting incoherent words that were lost in the night. That was the last time he tried to manipulate us directly. In the following weeks, David Miller informed me that Daniel had sold his vehicle, several valuable personal items, and had started working odd jobs to generate some money. Reality had finally imposed its inflexible rules. Michael completed all the legal registrations during that same week. Our assets were shielded by multiple layers of protection: an irrevocable trust, a modified will with specific exclusion clauses, medical documentation attesting to my full mental capacity, and a police file documenting the threats received. Michael confirmed in our last meeting of that stage, "From a legal standpoint, you have reached the maximum possible level of protection. Daniel cannot claim anything. The loan sharks have no legal basis to involve you, and any attempt to reverse these decisions would be automatically rejected by the courts." For the first time in months, I felt I could breathe easy. The reconquest of my dignity and the protection of my family had been successfully completed. What lay ahead was learning to live with the consequences of decisions that, although painful, had been absolutely necessary to preserve what truly mattered. The transformation of the manipulated father into the protective patriarch had reached its culmination. The months of September and October 2024 marked a period of radical transformation for everyone involved in this family crisis. While Linda and I began to rebuild the tranquility of our home, protected by the legal shield we had established, Daniel faced the real consequences of his decisions for the first time in his adult life. David Miller continued to discreetly monitor my son's activities, providing me with weekly reports that revealed a dramatic progression in his situation. The first reports were disheartening. Daniel had lost a considerable amount of weight, showed clear signs of post-traumatic stress, and his behavior fluctuated between deep depression and outbursts of impotent anger. "Mr. White," David informed me during one of our phone conversations in mid-September, "your son has sold practically all of his personal assets. The BMW was sold for $20,000, well below its real value, obviously out of an urgent need for cash. He has also sold his watch collection, some designer furniture, and even the mountain bike he used to ride on weekends." The image of Daniel stripping himself of all the symbols of his former lifestyle generated conflicting feelings in me. As a father, it was impossible not to feel some compassion for his suffering. As a man who had been systematically manipulated and betrayed, I experienced a grim satisfaction in seeing that he was finally paying the real price for his actions. "Has he managed to pay any of his debts to the loan sharks?" I asked, partially. "We estimate he has managed to raise about $40,000 from all the sales, which represents about 25% of his total debt. The loan sharks have accepted a staggered payment plan, but they maintain constant pressure." At the end of September, I received an unexpected call that would change my perspective on Daniel's evolution. It was John Davis, the owner of a well-known restaurant in our neighborhood, who contacted me because he had recognized the family name when Daniel applied for a job at his establishment. "Mr. White," he said in a cordial but cautious voice, "your son has been working for us as a waiter for the last 3 weeks. I must tell you that, although he arrived in precarious conditions, he has shown a work ethic we did not expect. He works double shifts without complaining, is punctual, and treats customers with courtesy." This information surprised me deeply. Throughout his adult life, Daniel had rejected any job he considered beneath him. The fact that he was now waiting tables in a restaurant represented a forced humility he had never shown voluntarily. "Has he mentioned anything about his family situation?" I asked. "Very little. We only know that he is going through serious financial difficulties and desperately needs the job. Some colleagues comment that he lives in a cheap boarding house downtown, very different from the lifestyle he apparently had before." John offered to keep me informed about Daniel's work performance, and I accepted this indirect supervision as a way to monitor his progress without directly interfering in his adaptation process. During October, the reports from both David and John confirmed a positive, though slow and painful, evolution. Daniel had begun to establish a stable routine. He worked at the restaurant from Tuesday to Sunday, was required to attend therapy sessions for gambling addicts that Michael had coordinated as part of the legal agreement, and dedicated his free time to looking for additional jobs to speed up the payment of his debts. The turning point came in mid-October when David informed me of a significant incident. "Mr. White, yesterday I witnessed something I think you'll be interested in. Your son ran into a group of his old acquaintances from the betting circle. They offered him a spot in a private game with the chance to win quick money. Daniel listened to them, hesitated visibly, but finally refused the invitation and walked away from the group. This small victory over his addiction represented more genuine progress than all the years of empty promises and elaborate justifications I had heard in the past. It was the first concrete evidence that Daniel was developing the willpower necessary to resist the temptation that had destroyed his life. However, progress was not linear. David also documented occasional relapses, nights where Daniel visited online betting sites, episodes of severe anxiety that led him to wander aimlessly through the streets of Chicago, and moments of deep depression where he seemed on the verge of emotional collapse. At the end of October, I received a handwritten letter from Daniel. It was not a plea for forgiveness, nor an attempt at manipulation, but something completely different, a mature and direct acknowledgement of his mistakes, accompanied by a detailed report on his rehabilitation efforts. The letter began like this: "Dad, I know I have no right to ask you to read this, but I need to tell you some important things. During these months, I have learned what it means to live with the real consequences of my decisions. I'm not going to ask for your forgiveness, because I understand that forgiveness must be earned with actions, not words." He went on to describe his daily routine, waking up at 5 a.m. to work the breakfast shift at the restaurant, eating frugally to save money, attending group therapy 3 times a week, and looking for additional jobs during his free time. It also included copies of the receipts for the payments he had managed to make to the loan sharks, proving that he was gradually fulfilling his commitments. "I have learned the real value of money," he wrote. "Every dollar I earn represents hours of genuine effort, not family manipulation. I have also learned that humility is not a defeat, but a form of honesty I had never experienced before." The letter concluded with a reflection that deeply impacted me. "I don't expect you to change your decision about the inheritance, and honestly, I think it was the right thing to do. I needed to hit rock bottom to understand who I really was and who I could become. For the first time in years, I am building something for myself, without lies or justifications." That night, after reading the letter several times, I shared it with Linda. We both agreed that although the words sounded sincere, only time and sustained actions could confirm whether they represented a genuine change or just another survival strategy. "Do you think we should respond?" Linda asked me. "Not yet," I replied. "If his transformation is real, it will continue regardless of our acknowledgement. If it's feigned, it will fall apart when he realizes he's not going to get anything from it." During November, the reports confirmed that Daniel was maintaining his work and therapy routine. He had gotten a second job on weekends at a sporting goods store, increasing his income and accelerating the pace of his debt payments. John confirmed that he had become one of his most reliable employees, even receiving praise from regular customers. But the most significant thing was that he had stopped trying to contact us. There were no more desperate calls, pleading letters, or attempts to intercept us when we left the house. His silence was not hostile, but respectful, the acknowledgement that he had lost the right to our closeness and could only regain it through fundamental changes in his behavior. At the end of November, David provided me with the most encouraging report to date. "Mr. White, your son has managed to pay off 60% of his debts. The loan sharks have significantly reduced their pressure, and some have even expressed respect for his consistency in payments. Furthermore, I have observed notable physical changes. He has regained a healthy weight, his personal appearance has improved, and he shows signs of emotional stability that I hadn't seen since we began monitoring. For the first time since the beginning of this crisis, I contemplated the possibility that Daniel could eventually rebuild his life in a genuine and sustainable way. However, I remained committed to not intervening in his process. If the transformation was real, it had to be completed without my help. If it was superficial, it would reveal itself over time. The most important lesson I had learned during these months was that authentic fatherly love sometimes requires the strength to stay away, allowing natural consequences to operate without compassionate interference that could sabotage genuine growth. With the arrival of the summer of 2025, the atmosphere in our home had radically changed. Where perpetual anxiety and uncertainty once lived, there was now a sense of calm and security that we hadn't experienced in a long time. Linda and I resumed old rituals, sunset walks in Lincoln Park, quiet evenings in our small living room listening to the radio, afternoons of shared reading as the light filtered softly through the windows. Little by little, we were rebuilding the foundations of our life together, celebrating the fact that peace could settle in the house without fear of a call or an unexpected visit disrupting everything. Daniel, meanwhile, followed a very different path from a distance. After almost a year of sustained effort, he managed to stay away from the vices and manipulation that had defined his previous existence. The reports from David and the comments from John, the restaurant owner, became less frequent. The young man's routine had stabilized. Work, therapy, and the cautious management of his scarce income. Daniel's transformation was not miraculous or sudden. There were days when the temptation of the past returned, disguised as an easy opportunity or a desire for escape. But according to the accounts of those who observed him, each relapse was faced with discipline, instead of seeking comfort in old traps. He devoted himself to work, introspection, and the anonymity of his new life. Perhaps for the first time in his adult existence, he was learning the value of genuine perseverance. A detail that quietly moved me was the rumor that Daniel had started to save small sums, keeping bills in a shoebox under his mattress. It wasn't the amount that was important, but the gesture, the will, however late, to build with his own hands what he had demanded from others for too long. It was also mentioned that a couple of colleagues from the restaurant had become his support circle, far from the toxic friendships that had dragged him down for years. Linda, for her part, went through a grieving process that involved accepting that the mother-son relationship would never be the same. She learned to value respectful silence over superficial contact. Her occasional calls to ask about Daniel's health left room for sincere answers, without falling into old dynamics. Her strength was, in the end, the cornerstone on which we built a new family phase. Less dependent, more authentic, and capable of setting boundaries that had never been respected before. On one of those summer days, after a quiet meal at home, I received a brief handwritten letter. It was from Daniel. It contained no pleas or promises, just 4 lines. "Dad, I know I can never make up for what I did, but I want you to know that I am building my life with honesty. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to have this certainty." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer without replying. The message required no words. Its value lay in the autonomy and the gesture of respect. Looking back, I understood that the journey we had undertaken as a family was not just a process of asset protection, nor a clash of wills. It was, above all, a chronicle of learning about dignity, fatherhood, and the possibility of establishing new balances when all seems lost. The wound took a long time to heal, but now it was just a mark that reminded me of the lessons learned. My assets remained protected, my marriage strengthened, and my spirit finally at peace. From Daniel, the only thing I could hope for was that he would make his new life his own work, without depending on the easy refuge he would have once sought in us. Defending my dignity and autonomy so firmly not only saved our future, but it taught everyone involved that sometimes true love means letting each person face their own storms. Respecting that process was the greatest act of respect and justice I could offer. If you liked this story, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box on the left. Thanks for watching.